Hey, 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 y'all. How you doing? Yay. Welcome to CRS. My name is Krista Hayes Pruitt. I am with BBR BMG Nashville, and I am co-vice chair of this year's planning committee. And thank you so much for being here. We're so excited. Before we get started, we have a special guest in the room. We have Angela from New Leash on Life, and she is with all of the amazing puppies in Music Row 1. And we have this adorable little chunk. Hi, honey. I love you so much. You guys are more than welcome to stop by, love on the puppies, hug all on the puppies. And if you need a puppy, they are up for adoption. So, yes, Music Row 1, thank you to the New Leash on Life family. Thank you so much for being here for sure. And without further ado, I am happy to welcome Jeff Green.
Oh my God, we're dead. Good morning, everybody. Um, I'm Jeff Green from the Stone Door Media Lab, and welcome to the Sparks Behind the Streams, where we're going to discuss how you can use data to see a hit in the making. Joining me are three experts. We have Warner Music Nashville's Addison Nunes, and Warner Records' Casey Campbell, based in Los Angeles, and Emily Gilbert from G Major Management. They oversee the career of Thomas Rhett and others. And you'll find everyone's bios in the CRS app. Radio used to be pretty much the only way a song became a hit, and radio still leads in the overall share of audio listening time. But more and more, as you know, hits are defined by streaming activity, which now accounts for about 84% of US music revenues. And our panel agenda chair, Tori Mason, reminds us that a streaming hit can be driven from anywhere. Radio, of course, but also a streaming partner, YouTube, a social media moment, SiriusXM, a TV performance, touring success, and other channels. And on the screen, you will see a list of many of the diverse metrics, or what we call sparks, that Addison, Casey, and Emily study to discover what may be driving or sustaining streaming activity. One big challenge for labels and managers is how to prioritize when several tracks are getting streaming traction in different ways at the same time. So to help, analytics have moved to the front burner, and we're going to run through several of examples of what our panelists look for and why. Our resident, what I call musical cardiologists, will show you something you've probably never seen before, which are going to be what you could call the EKGs of hit records. We may be able to take some questions near the end, so send us yours through the CRS app, and Tori will be monitoring those for us. Casey, there's been a lot of talk about Zach Bryan here at CRS already. Why don't you start us off? There's been a massive interest in Something in the Orange. Is about as good example as any at redefining what a hit is.
Yeah, Zach's really interesting. I mean, when we picked him up at Warner Records, but like he had this constant momentum that we saw prior to him signing. Even his like debut power, like the way he can debut first week, first day, like first 4 weeks, continued to grow before we signed him. But then when we signed him off of like, we distributed from Austin, which was great, followed by Something in the Orange, which saw like compound growth right out of the gate. It was just, it's great. But let me tell you what you guys are looking at, because it might freak you out. The very top part of that is just streams and downloads on a dual access, so you can just kind of see the general trend in the US. Just below that is all the impressions. Impressions coming out of TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, as well as radio. On the same axis, you can actually see Shazam's, which is that teal line, and how that tracks depending on where the impressions are driving from. And then just below that is just online creates. You're going to see a couple of these throughout the panel on a couple of our other examples, just so you can kind of see what's happening. But Zach's had like a lot of online momentum when we first signed him, coming out of YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, even Instagram. And that's what we saw initially with this track out of the gate. Over about the first 20 weeks of this song, there was just compounding growth coming out of TikTok, and you can kind of see most of the impressions at one point getting to almost 100 million impressions a week just in TikTok in the US. And then that's kind of what really amplified us starting our radio campaign, which was a big thing for us, is because Zach really didn't have much radio to begin with before coming to Warner. And this was kind of like our first domino of like, we need to get him in the gate. We need to get him and his radio campaign up and running, because assuming we were going to have more radio campaigns with him going forward. So that was kind of the antithesis of this. And, you know, Zach's like, yeah, it's great. I like it.
Well, has there been a way to prioritize and focus among all this activity that's going on? I mean, how did you you talk about watering the rest of the garden when you've got, it's been enormous, 5 of the top 50 right now, 11 of the top 100 streaming songs, and 15 of the top 200. How do you water the rest of the garden?
Very strategically. One of the things that we had to focus on was, this massive song that lasted, basically it's still hanging around for 3 years. It's been doing about 10 million plus streams a week. But one of the issues that we've actually had is he continues to put out music and bigger songs coming out of the gate. So we've had to prioritize keeping this alive through the first 12 months, on top of TV campaigns, other songs sprinkling into the marketplace, that we usually follow up with editorial support and online support as much as we can, while we were still trying to focus on something in the orange for that first year of the campaign.
Did you want to just let it run as long as you could, or was there a conscious effort to say, we need to move on?
I mean, if something doing this amount of volume, you don't want to let it go to waste, so you keep perpetuating that momentum as much as possible. I mean, we continue to stimulate this even in online outlets like TikTok for years. Continue to sprinkle in the momentum from the viral sense in digital and online sense as much as we could. When we saw continued trend to spin up, we continued to feed those flames as much as possible, just to kind of continue the momentum of this song. But then also, like, as you drop new music, Dawn's, I Remember Everything, like, we had to pivot. But, this Something in the Orange would go to the back burner, but still we would continue to water as much as possible.
Now, everybody knows, I mean, country radio certainly hasn't been very much a part of Zach's career so far anyway. No top 15s so far. But we're not really seeing that much in terms of AAA or rock or alternative either. Is radio just an impossible sell here?
It shouldn't be. I'm kind of perplexed myself just on the lack of radio support we've seen over all the songs. But the one thing we have been able to garner with Zach and his audience is he's a machine online, and we can garner a lot of impressions that you can see. Like, we're doing about 20 million impressions a week, even on Something in the Orange, agnostic of radio to date. So we just kind of have this game plan of using what we're already good at and what we can see, and perpetuating that with all the new music, and coming up with campaigns and marketing plans to kind of achieve those as much as we can.
Great. I'd like to get a sense as to who is here. So this is what we call an artist development session, but it's really for everybody. How many of you here are on the creative side, labels, on the label or artist development side, if you will, management, etc.? Okay, pretty good size. How many are from the radio side? Okay, so we're leaning more on the creative and artist management force here. That's good to know. So Addison, we're going to move on here and talk about Cody Johnson. Let's bring him up here. So we're talking about a #1 record last September, 27 weeks on the chart, CMA nomination. Talk us about this record.
Sure. So I think the most important thing here for Dirt Cheap is, for us, it didn't start as a focus. It came out with the album Leather back in November of 2023, and it wasn't the song we pitched for editorial support. It wasn't the song we started out with a big marketing campaign. But the activity we saw on social media changed all of that for us. But basically, out of the gate, we saw fans interacting with the song on TikTok and Instagram, finding the sound, creating really heartfelt content that aligned with the lyrics and the meaning of the song. And the biggest thing for us, right, is that then translated to organic streams, which, is taking an action, people searching for the song or listening to it out of their library. And it was just pretty impossible to ignore right out of the gate, where in that first week, the song did almost 4 million streams, and 90% of that activity was organic. There wasn't, a DSP playlist propping it up. And so even with that, right, you can see like the little spike in the graphs up on the screen that Casey explained, but it didn't, just plummet from there, which, to your point, like also fuels it in that it wasn't just a flash in the pan situation. It continued where more people were finding different lyrics, part of the song, new sounds were trending on these platforms that ultimately drove us to pick it as the next single to radio, and to your point, it ended up going #1.
It was the focus track at the time from what would become the CMA Album of the Year, but you saw several out-of-the-gate indicators on Dirt Cheap, with TikTok and Instagram, Snapchat, Shazam, over 500,000 already. Was it the collective engagement activity that led you to pursue this track, or was it always going to be a single? How did it play out?
Sure. I'm not an A&R, so I'll put a disclaimer there. But, I think it was a favorite before it came out. Again, just the lyrics of the song, if anyone here has heard it and listened to it, it's pretty powerful. But, again, it's all those things where it just surprises you in the sense by the numbers out of the gate that I think ultimately led us to pick it. And again, it wasn't just that first week, right, or the first couple. It was something that continued to grow to the point where the social activity was surpassing what we were seeing on The Painter, which was the current radio single and, the one we were putting all of our weight behind at the time. And, seems like it worked out, right? We got the #1 at radio, and here you can see in that middle graph, that light gray blob there is, I don't know how to describe that, is the radio audience aligned with that teal line, which is Shazam. So even though all these people for Cody had discovered this song on social media, right, and were engaging with it, radio in this sense for this song still drove more discovery and more people finding that song and being able to engage in other ways.
Is this graph that we're seeing, the one in the middle, is that typical, or is that a freaky, incredible outcome?
The fact the radio audience or the Shazam
Well, just the
portion?
way, that you see that gigantic Dolomite mountain spike of that.
If the song's at radio, right, and it's going to go #1,
That's what you see?
You need that amount of audience to do that. But yeah, it's just nice to see everything align, not just there, right, but then also in the top graph representing the streams that continued. So we're seeing people keep, re-engaging with the song. Even on the bottom graph, you see another giant spike in the middle that kind of aligns with that radio push. And that for us was we released the music video, which, again, very powerful, like images, and it's a lot of it, just, you resonate and you think of home. And so people, again, started posting about the song, their reaction to the music video. This is just, one of those songs and where you see everything take off, and it's a great example of just the possibility of everyone coming in.
Casey, you helped organize these images. Is this what you see when you see a record going viral like this?
The great thing that this shows is like that sequence of events and domino effect of like something starting off online, in this case like really stimulated at TikTok, but then followed up by additional drivers that continued that sticky nature of the song. Like, to Addison's point, it's clear that there was some sticky behavior going on within those first couple of weeks. The amount of volume that the track garnered, the minimal decay rate that was seen, and then continued growth. But then you layer in a new driver a la radio, and there was still more stimulus organically. Downloads continued to accelerate. Shazam's accelerated to its highest peak via its radio campaign. Like, it's just that extra layer, or like what we refer to in Warner Records as like surface area of impressions, audience. It's just unlocking that like next level that it was initially derived from kind of this general TikTok instigation.
Wow, it's impressive. Addison, last November, Dirt Cheap was generating thousands of TikTok creations per day, 120,000 by now and 1.8 million views. It was also driving almost 4 million streams a week, and as you said, overwhelmingly organic, and maybe you want to explain the difference between organic versus programmed here, but it was a very high proportion. Clearly, user-generated creations was a real driver for Cody. Explain how impressive these kinds of numbers are and what it signaled to you as a track. Was this above your expectations, or was it in the ballpark?
Yeah, I mean, I think we go back to that. We weren't focusing on this from a marketing perspective out of the gate. So to see that sort of activity on a song like that, where maybe you were focusing your efforts elsewhere, I would say it blew our expectations out of the water. I know something Emily will touch on too later is when you talk about expectations, looking at that artist, right? The expectations aren't the same for every artist. The benchmarks aren't the same for everyone, or even within an artist, depending on the song. So again, with that just out of the gate, coupled with Casey just touched on, right? Like it continued to grow. It just became undeniable to us that it was something we needed to support, and the fact that it started that way, without a big marketing push or an influencer campaign or radio out of the gate, and it held its own, and then we were able to come and further support that with all of those things, right, and more marketing drivers to really push it to the best that it could be.
Oh. When you read the trade ads in Country Air Check, they mostly focus on streaming activity. You don't usually see other media mentioned, but Dirt Cheap was about 100 million streams now on Spotify and another 37 million on Pandora, which leans a little older. How are you able to convey X million streams into a persuasive argument to bring to radio? I mean, Cody's pretty well established at radio, but you're still working record by record. Is there a timing element here or a quantity threshold that you need to see that's of significance that you think will be persuasive to radio to get an ad or a bump in rotation?
I mean, short answer, no. But I think it's all about context, right? So, I mean, the numbers aren't easily found, but like for this song in particular, across all the platforms, it's at over 300 million streams, which sounds like a huge number, but that number might seem small to Casey when he looks at Zach Bryan, or it could be really big to Emily when she's looking at a different Thomas Rhett song, or vice versa. So I think for us, and when we're talking to radio as labels, our job is to provide that context, right? Like what else is going on the chart around it, and then I think, which I've seen touched on some panels earlier in the week, is what's happening in that specific market. And that can really help, I think, try to convince and persuade radio to play a song, which, I mean, that we could go down a whole nother path and this become a very different panel. But for us, it's all about providing context.
Yeah, I'll just chime in on this too. These timelines are like the bread and butter of what we're used to looking at. And so when you talk about that initial streaming wasn't just the first week or the second week, that green line on the top there, the fact that it debuted one so high, but then also like that it didn't plummet. A lot of times you see that decay just like happens really fast, and a lot of times it's more about managing the decay than anything else. So yes, it's going down, but then the volume itself is still really strong, and it's happening organically. And so that context is really important. Not everything's going to necessarily grow, but in this case, this amount of decline is really impressive when you know the context around the song.
Don't see very much of it at all, really. Yeah. I mean, if you saw this and you didn't know where the record was, it was just you were just looking at this graph, that would impress you, I would think, right?
I would say that this song is really reactive. If I didn't know the song and just looked at this data, like this is a reactive song based on the drivers that we're seeing be input.
That's great. Emily, Thomas Rhett, Teddy Swims, Something About a Woman. Talk to us.
Yeah, sure. So I started at G Major back in September of last year, and Thomas Rhett had just released his album, About a Woman, and Beautiful As You was the current radio single, just approaching the top 10 at the time. And we shortly learned that and confirmed a performance on the upcoming CMA Awards with Teddy Swims. They were going to perform Something About a Woman. And that song, TR's solo version, was already out in the marketplace with the album. So, you know, a wonderful traditional media performance look, obviously that massive impressions that happens live network ABC, but also next day Hulu, and then the kind of more on-demand looks you get from the performance going up on platforms like YouTube. But those traditional media performances, if you'll notice the relatively unknown or maybe even new songs performed, you know, there's a lot of challenges that come with that because there's no awareness with the audience. It's not impossible, but when you're looking for a good consumption boost from the performance, it's typically better, not in all cases, but typically better to have some awareness in the marketplace beforehand. And so, you know, TR already had a lot going on with the album and the single, but we wanted to put together a plan to help, you know, amplify this new tentpole. And you can't manufacture viral, obviously, but we wanted to create the best conditions to build as much awareness and anticipation for their performance as possible. So that brings me to the first bullet point, is just resurfacing or reintroducing TR and Teddy Swims' friendship. The collaboration was not random. They've been friends for years, and TR had actually featured on one of Teddy Swims' tracks back in 2020, a single called Broke. They had shot a music video. I highly recommend you go check it out. It's a total bop.
Great song. It's a great song.
It's super fun. And there was a lot of BTS footage from the music video shoot as well. So just seeding some of that content on short form platforms where maybe folks didn't know about it or wanted to rediscover it, and kind of resurfacing TR and Teddy Swims that way. On a more serious note, they have written together several times, including TR's single Angels. And there was a great interview, I believe, done by Apple Music that we surfaced some of that content, them just talking about the writing process and that single. So we're also seeding that on short form. The combination of that and also just using Something About a Woman a bit more in TR's social content himself, we started to see an initial bump on that solo version. So that was kind of the first kind of increase there, up 16%. Then that brings me to the next bullet point, the content shoot. Teddy Swims really has a pulse on what works for him in the short form space. And we really wanted to lean into that and trust in his team to kind of bring that piece to the table. Luke Conway and Kylie Scarlett were great partners with his management team, Alex Chandler at Warner. And we kind of put together a shoot that we let them lead on. Randall Telfer and Ben Hanning were the producers. Logan Mize shot it and directed it. And we came out with this amazing, fun, engaging content. And the second we started teasing their collaboration with that content, we saw a reaction. So again, the solo version that was already out was up 95%, and it quickly became TR's biggest sound on TikTok specifically, in short form in general. So we saw that reaction happening before we even had released the master version. So we also had, obviously, a master version of the collab. And our label partners at Big Machine did a great job. As I mentioned earlier, with the album and having, you know, DSP campaigns around that, and then the current single, Beautiful As You, having incredible placement, kind of putting those layers together with FM radio as, you know, that climb was happening in the top 10. Ashley Sidoti and Andy Brooks did a great job of finding some unique opportunities for this new collab to come out and have some editorial placement where those folks who do discover primarily on platform, on DSPs, would still have the opportunity to find it there. So we're driving from short form and on platform with the track releasing 11/15. And then their performance was 11/20 Wednesday. So you'll notice the beginning Thursday, 11/21. That's that combined, both the original and the duet. We saw a massive increase in really impressive global streaming numbers. So that was the third bullet. And then the fourth was, you know, a kind of a unique opportunity with Teddy Swims specifically as a collaborator. He's built a really impressive audience ex-US in the UK and beyond. And so we wanted to kind of understand how much of that was fueling discovery for TR, but also what that traditional, more country listener was driving discovery for Teddy as well. So this was an instance where we did pay a little more attention to things like Google search trends and Wikipedia to understand, okay, if folks have heard the song, they've discovered it, are they doing their research? Are they becoming obsessed with these artists that they're discovering for the first time? And is that happening domestically or ex-US? So, that was kind of the campaign and putting in those layers. And then finally, I'll just add, that week of Thanksgiving, we actually saw an increase of 7%. This would be following the performance. The content, they killed it on the show, and then that content performed really well afterwards on short form. And so in a week, we kind of anticipated decline because anytime folks are out of their daily routine, in country especially, we see a decline. We actually saw a 7% increase, so while it's not massive, it was really impressive to us and showed that there was some sustainability here with this track. So just building those layers of sparks from resurfacing their friendship to the short form, new content, and then DSP, and then the more traditional media performance.
That's great. That layering obviously pays off. Were these the kinds of success metrics that you were hoping to see?
Yeah, and also like how this layered into the album. Again, knowing we had a song going #1 that week at country radio, different song. We had focused on other tracks from the album release, pre-release, and so just bringing another track, some awareness and building those together. The album jumped from 55 to 33. So just again, kind of resurfacing that with all these layers together, it kind of built more of a story around TR going into the end of the year.
Since this is an artist development panel, how does all this layering work for your 2025 plan for TR?
Yeah, that's a great question. You just teed me up. This week is the largest streaming week for Something About a Woman. So we've been able to we kind of survived the holiday decline, if you will, really well with this track and TR in general. Because everybody shifts to switching or to streaming Christmas music during the holidays. And so you kind of want to rebound out of that. And he really has. So we released an alt version of his upcoming single, After All the Bars Are Closed. And then on top of that, Teddy immediately, at the top of the year, went into album promotion mode for his new album that just came out. And this being a collaboration algorithmically and autoplayed and all those things, it's only benefited from that. And so we were able to kind of build on that into the new year, and now we have again multiple songs charting and surfacing that album.
Fantastic. Casey, we're going to come back to you. We'll continue our round robin here, and we are going to talk about Dasha. Austin, go ahead.
So when we picked up Dasha at Warner, she was already on this massive growth trajectory, going from about 80,000 streams initially a week in the U.S. to 8 million streams by the time we picked her up. Once we picked her up, we continued that trajectory for another few months to get to about 15, 16 million streams a week, which is kind of where this graph starts upon like our signing, and you can kind of see that spiking in around like 12 weeks later, which is, again, fantastic. And this is a big like layering effect of, yes, this was totally stimulated out of TikTok initially, and not just domestically, but globally, which had this elongated process of TikTok development. Normally a viral TikTok cycle in the US is maybe 2 weeks, maybe you can squeeze out 3 weeks. But because this sequenced across the world globally, it just continued to compound in growth in the TikTok ecosystem. And you can kind of start to see in the domestic numbers, this then stimulated Instagram and YouTube, not to the extent of TikTok, during our campaign, which we started to facilitate because it wasn't initially there. We tried layering in those other digital outlets. But then this also stimulated our radio campaigns at Country and Top 40. With volume in the 10 million range, it's like, this has to go on radio in some capacity. So, Country was, I think we probably even started working the song or talking about the song before the ink was dry on the deal with Country Radio. Don't quote me on that, please. But we wanted that ball rolling. But the other thing is, because we were seeing this ex-US development, and that's where actually we initially saw this developing out of, this was a pop song. So there was already talks of, okay, it's working ex-US, what should we be doing for top 40? And other formats, if at all possible. So that's kind of the instigation of that. And you can see the growth development, and you can see that the Shazam teal line continuously builds up to about 25 weeks into the campaign. That's the radio campaign that we saw, and the development of that. So there's definitely a lot of reactivity. There is a lot of like development and finding of Dasha and Austin.
You know, you always see, or usually you hope to see a lot of Shazam activity after radio gets on it, because, you know, not every record gets back announced, and so people are checking it out. That is a massive acceleration there. Did that surprise you? I mean, are these numbers what you expected?
It did surprise us, but not really, knowing that, again, going for a radio audience, it's that older demo that we wanted to see if we could unlock and see if it was just as sticky as the younger audience that was coming out of the dance routines, which is, you can see Shazam spiked around the TikTok cycle as well, but then quickly depleted as the TikTok effect kind of wore off and that virality wore off in that ecosystem. But to be able to cobble back the amount of Shazams and then sustain downloads and the minimal decay in streams over time was like, we started to unlock that audience with not just radio, but we had lots of TV campaigns. She performed on the Thanksgiving Day Parade, which there was a big spike around that. So we continue to layer in a lot of the additional demos and artist and consumer segments that we wanted to kind of bolster around Dasha in her development. And that was kind of the plan. As you know, the dominoes started with TikTok, and we wanted to see if we can, layer in the rest of these drivers.
It is a rarity to see a country record start internationally. It's very unusual. Happy to see that. With only 46, according to Chartmetric last week, only 46%, less than half of her primary audience is in the United States. She's in Europe as we speak right now, in France, Germany, and the Netherlands.
I think she's around here today, but she was.
Oh, yeah, right, of course. Yeah, right, has been.
Yes, has been in Europe.
In light of her success with this record, where does international fit in with her long-term plans? It's an unusual but pretty smart head start, I think.
I mean, it was amazing to see the international sparks out of places like Norway and Ireland initially, even before we signed her, and then light up throughout Europe. We saw that if anybody paid attention to the Spotify charts, you saw Europe actually light up before the US actually got involved. But that to us, and that 46% number that you're talking about, 40%, that's a pop song. That's the same proportion Dua Lipa pulls. That's the same proportion Benson Boone pulls from the U.S. with a global pop song. And one of the things that we were always looking at with when we initially started looking at this song to even now is, if you looked at this song without listening to it just by the data, this looks like a pop song. The proportions ex-US, the DSP proportions between them, the demographics, it was a pop song by data perspectives.
That's great. Let's move on. We're gonna, and by the way, if you want to know more about Dasha, there's going to be her cycle later this afternoon, and of course, New Faces tonight. Good luck with that. Addison, let's talk about Braxton Keith, Cozy, which has become such an earworm for me. I've been hearing it a lot on SiriusXM, and I can't get it out of my head. The other night, it was played over about 500 times.
Yeah, so I think with Braxton, unlike the other examples we've seen, you can see this not come out of the gate screaming, right? It was a slower build, and I mean, I think that just speaks to the environment that we are in nowadays and how people are consuming music, right? Used to be you dropped an album, people went and bought it right away kind of thing. You had no idea what they listened to. Now these things have longer life cycles, and anything with not just the streaming DSPs but social media can kind of pop at any moment. So here out of the gate, I mean, we had Braxton beginning of 2024, and this song did do well for him in comparison to his other songs right at the beginning. But he just constantly was engaging on social media, and I'm a terrible singer, so I'm really sorry. But like, basically there's a line in the song starts with she, and he just drug it out and went, she, I can't do it. I'm sorry. Imagine it in your head.
It's ridiculous. It's
yeah.
crazy.
Anyways, really, really played into that, and that for some reason resonated with on social media and on TikTok specifically. You can see like, not just TikTok in this case, even though that's where it started, but on that bottom graph, like there's a yellow line, Snapchat was a big thing for him as well as Instagram. And that kind of aligns for us and who we knew his demographic to be for his fans, leaning younger. They're mostly on Snapchat and Instagram. Even later on, you're seeing that huge Instagram, that pink spike at the bottom. All of those Instagram creations were also coming from people's stories and like, I think they're called stickers, right? Like when people message them back and forth to each other, which again aligns with that younger demographic. Like, I don't know, they just don't like stuff being permanent in the feed, right? They like the disappearing impact, I guess.
They don't want their parents to know.
There you go. Close friends only. So for us, it was when that spark happened and watching then how that impacted everything else, right? So there's a lot of times on social media something pops or goes viral depending on whatever your definition of viral is, but we saw it translate to the streaming side of things. So
Yeah, you
got
just
something to
look
say?
at that top line, this natural, sure, steady growth. I mean, that is like the perfect EKG of a hit record. Spotify streams, Pandora track stations, Shazam counts, YouTube views, likes, comments, TikTok posts, SoundCloud streams. I mean, they're all doing this. In terms of artist development, how do you prioritize those positive indicators?
Yeah, I mean, I think the priority for us is, right, we want to see it on more than just one. I mean, for every artist, again, like going back to his demographic, being that younger demographic, like Instagram and Snapchat for us were huge versus, we've talked about a lot of other examples like TikTok being the start of everything and being the biggest driver, which TikTok, you can see in that middle impressions graph, like it allows you to get the most eyeballs, I would say, just based on the nature of how that platform works. But really being able to see people take that extra step and use the sound to make their own content is another huge indicator for us that people are liking the song and liking the artist. And in the case for Braxton and artist development, it wasn't just this song. We saw, in this month time span, his Instagram followers increased by 20,000. His TikTok followers increased by 60,000. It was people who just weren't listening to this song and, dipping out. They were engaged with the artist, where we were seeing that. You talked about Google search. I mean, you can even go, it's free, googletrends.com. I think that's what it is, but, you can see what who's searching for Braxton and where, and the other things they're thinking about, right? Like, are they searching the lyrics of the song because they don't know the title? Are they searching, I feel like how tall an artist is a really big thing.
How much are they worth?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
But it's just little things like that, to your point, that help you create that artist development story and then also help fuel these other sparks that you're trying to layer in your marketing campaign about what people are interested in this artist.
And one thing I'd like to point out is artists are good in certain platforms. I mean, some artists, as we know, like are walk-ons for radio, and that's a good starting point. There's other artists that we have that are great on TikTok, like Benson Boone being one of them. He's a machine in TikTok. Not so much in the other areas, but it is to perpetuate that impressional volume in those other services on kind of behalf of them. In other cases, there's certain artists that are great because the demo and it's coming more out of Snapchat or out of like YouTube. Matter of fact, Maddox Batson for us, he's a very young developing artist, country artist. Like, he is all in YouTube. It's YouTube Shorts and YouTube. That is the only thing we're going to be focusing on for probably the next 12 months. So that's kind of the instigation of everything, and then it's filling in and layering in DSPs, all the other social platforms, radio campaigns, but like that's where it's going to start, or we're going to nurture from. I think that's a very big like artist development, but even song development, like play to your strengths and then build out the sequence and dominoes from there.
So you're kind of like calling audibles at the line of scrimmage in many cases, right? You've got a game plan on how you want to layer it, but sometimes something will pop and then you'll pivot, right?
100%. Like, I mean, Addie had a great example. I mean, like I said, even Meant to Be, like that was the very similar thing that came off for EP. That was a song that nobody was paying attention to for BB Rexa. And we made a full pivot to, a global smash. So you do have to call an audible, and you have to pay attention to kind of the EKG of how things are moving and developing in the public eye and out online. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Great. Emily, we will get back. You had mentioned Benson Boone, and we're going to get back to him in a minute because he's pretty interesting. But Emily, rather than going through another new EKG at the moment, walk us through some of these topics that typically surface in conversations about short form and streaming. Let's talk about teasing music on short form platforms and what good numbers you look for in terms of UGC when it comes to teasing a song before it's released to DSPs. Walk us through some of these things.
Yeah. I mean, we'd all love to share 10 more examples with you, but I thought it would be valuable just to bring up some topics that are surfacing conversations when people are trying to understand more about this translation of short form to streaming, or how do you gauge that reaction. And it's something that didn't really come up much in our examples, but is a pretty key component in a release strategy, or can be, is teasing. And what's a good threshold of UGC, of views? How long should you tease for? None of us have one answer. There is no one formula. I think sometimes you see an artist have a lot of success with, and that might create a little bit of a trend. So if an artist, for example, has success releasing 3 tracks, they debut well, and they tease them for, say, 3 weeks each. Everybody's paying attention. We might go, oh, 3 weeks, that's the answer. But you might turn around and try that with a different artist, and it totally doesn't work. Or even that same artist might do it again, and it may not work to the same level. So, part of the timing of these things is the platforms evolve really quickly. The algorithms evolve, how we use them evolves, and even if you scroll TikTok regularly, you may not notice the shift as you're using it day over day. But if you look back a month, 2 months, 3 months, there's a huge change in how these feeds develop and how users are engaging with them. And so that's going to even affect if you're looking at an artist, the same artist, and trying to benchmark or make a projection based on their prior releases. So if you have 20,000 UGC going into a release, you might say, oh, well, we had 20,000 last time and we debuted with 3 million, so we're going to debut with 3 million again. Well, you might only debut with 1 million, so there really is no formula. And I think something that we all talked about is you want to layer as many of these metrics and data points as possible to get as much information to build your projection and your expectations, and then your plan for what you do post-release as well.
So where do people get these resources? How do they find all this stuff? They need to subscribe to Chartmetric and Luminate? I mean, how accessible are these tools to the radio people here, or if you're in artist management or you're an independent artist on your own?
Yeah, so if you have a label partner, all the major labels have developed quite sophisticated tracking, and they get data directly from these partners, from the streaming partners, from your short form partners. And so they can be a great resource for you to communicate, the story of what's going on. Like these graphs that we've all shared, are regularly available. So, obviously it's quite complicated, and we are putting together a lot of different metrics to understand what's going on. But your label partners are going to have, be a great resource for you. Chartmetric has continued to do a great job in developing more to their platform and adding more information as it becomes more relevant. And even if you've checked it out before, I recommend diving back in. You're probably going to find new sections and new data that's become available. And I think it's it's an easy tool to go and say, oh, the followers are this at Instagram and this at like it puts everything together in one spot. But it's so much more than that because they've really added a lot of detail. So I do recommend Chartmetric for that reason. And then there are other tools, for short form, like Co-Brand has been a great tool. I know they're a Canadian company, they've done a great job. Melody IQ has also been a great tool at times for tracking sounds, just to understand that sound information on short form. So, there are a ton of different resources. I'm sure this list will have 3 new names by the end of the year. But your label partners are going to be a great partner, and then I would say Chartmetric probably for the social data. Luminate is on here, obviously, has been a great partner for music consumption in general, and they do have all the streaming data, readily available.
Great. Can't resist going back to one more. Let's look at what was just the biggest streaming record of 2024. So how can you avoid it? Talk to us, and this was right in your wheelhouse because this so ubiquitous and incredible Grammy performance as well. Walk us through one more. We've got some group questions, but I'd like to hear just a brief view of this one.
Yeah, I think this is just a really great example of like the layering of different impressional values and volumes and all the KPIs and sources of material that when you talk about a big frickin' song, this is how a big freaking song was developed. And you can see that it's Instagram, it's TikTok, it's radio, it's YouTube, it's Facebook. This was getting up to, at one point in the US, 1 billion impressions a week. And then it maintained even through the radio campaign across all of the online social platforms, about 400 million impressions a week. And I know from a multi-format, radio song, coming out of Mediabase, you can see a really good song can maybe do 100 million impressions a week. So this is 4x that when you start layering in the amount of views that were happening on TikTok, the amount of views that were happening on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, and then the circulation of whatever Snapchat was deriving as well. So you want to get to a song that's doing 25 million streams or 30 million streams a week, and this is where popular culture and the really wide surface area is actually coming from.
That's enormous. We've got about 8 or 9 minutes, so if you do have a question, let Tori know through the CRS app, and we'll see if we can get to it. And so we do have some radio people in the room. What data would you find, you guys, would be you think is the most value to program directors and music directors that delivers the most compelling story to radio? It could be local streams. We've seen, a lot of guys want to see local streaming information. That obviously makes sense. Shazam and Chartmetric and social and Luminate, et cetera. Do you need all these platforms to cut through to make your case? What do you think is the most compelling story?
I'll go. Again, it's going to depend, I think, on the programmer you're talking to. But for me, I think your market, again, matters. At least what we've heard back from radio, global streams isn't as a big deal for them because they're programming, not to Australia or Europe. They're programming to Nashville, Tennessee, or, whoever their market may be. For me, I think the biggest thing, too, if you're on the radio side, is ask questions of whoever's bringing you this data. I think there's still maybe a lot of lack of trust, and that might come from a lack of understanding, or maybe us not being as transparent as we think we are. So I would always ask questions, right? Instead of if someone tells you, oh, this song went up 10% this week, I would ask why, right? I think we should be honest with you about, that came from organic and that leaning forward of a search or a library, or did it get added to a big playlist? I think that's important in telling the story of it's not just, again, a percentage increase or a straight streaming number. It's about giving it that context of what's happening. And I would hope that would help them, assuming that it is great context and a great story, help convince them to see that this is something people are engaging with outside of radio, so why wouldn't they want to play it on their station?
Radio being the great magnifier, if you were in radio, what would you be asking for?
So,
I can talk if you want.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think those things, right? Instead of just telling me a number or a percentage increase, again,
yeah.
I would ask why.
Why?
And then not just in 1 week, right? But what has the trend been?
that to me is the biggest thing is there's a lot of reports that are circulated even from our team and within WMG, like it is that week over week representation, and that's not the whole picture most of the time. It is like, hey, this song's been up 12 weeks straight. Like that's the bigger, like, and it's all of these things that have been compounding to this. Yeah, it might only be up 7% week over week, but this has been happening consistently over time, and it's all organic, or this is when editorials like kicked into overdrive. So it's that kind of step back, take a 30,000-foot view of what's actually happening in your market or locally or on a given coast. But I think that's more telling to me than anything.
I also think whether you're a radio programmer or even like we're trying to make decisions at the artist level or label level or whatever it is, in what's an early bet, right? Some of the big streaming tracks are going to be kind of obvious, and especially established artists. That's a little more clear cut. But especially when you're looking at like a newer developing artist, what kind of volume are you talking about? Are you talking about a loud comment, one loud comment, or maybe a loud opinion or a trusted voice that speaks loudly to you? Or are you talking about volume in terms of there's a lot of people on TikTok or on streaming service that are choosing this themselves, and understanding that story, what kind of volume do you have and what kind of volume is being shared with you from your label partners? That's, if I was at radio, what I want to understand.
And then the other thing too I want to mention is like, I think some people get really myopic on like the one thing that they pay attention to, and that's not the case anymore. I know like Shazam used to be a really good indicator like historically about things. I'm seeing a lot of false positives in Shazam where people are Shazamming a crap ton of certain songs, but once they really find out what it is, they're not consuming it. In a lot of cases, it comes to a lot of our urban acts where they're using samples of very well-known songs, and they're like, I know that song, they're Shazamming the heck out of it, but then it's not leading to that last part of stickiness of consumption. So like, looking at one thing, like cool, a lot of Shazams, is it following up to downloads? Is it following up to organic streaming consumption? Is it unlocking the next kind of sequence of events? Is kind of that bigger thing.
I think we have time for one or two more questions, but I really think that, there's been some skepticism about the importance of Snapchat or TikTok because they lean young, and radio's going, well, that's not really my demo, so why should I be paying attention to it?
I mean, I'll go. I think for our genre specifically in country that it's a family experience too. So a lot of times whatever kids are doing, their parents are also listening to. I mean, Casey has kids. I'm sure he can talk about that. And so I think that's one thing. And I think the other thing is, right, we could throw out all the demo stats, which I don't have off the top of my head for all these platforms. But even though they might lean younger, there's still a large group of people that are matching the radio core audience that are using these platforms and interacting with them.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is TikTok is like 5 years in the market as being a popular platform. That's about the life cycle where my grandma's like, TikTok? My mom's like, oh, that TikTok again. I mean, like, we all hear the rhetoric around it, but it's been adopted by multiple generations at this point. Yes, early on, the youth really drove those initial downloads and active users, but as time goes on, that, older generations continue to adopt. And so, the reality is, while it's still a great tool for us, it's 5 years. I would expect another platform to pop off here shortly. I mean, if you just look at the timelines, we were talking backstage, Facebook was college, and then Instagram came along, and then, Snapchat, and now TikTok. So, it's not new at this point, I think, is why it's not just young anymore.
And I think it also depends on if you're developing an artist. Like if we're developing a young artist, we need to start with the young audience. And we need to make sure we're nurturing that appropriately and then continuing to grow them through the other platforms and other media outlets and other kind of impressional outlets that we can attain. But like I said, like with Maddox Batson, like it's YouTube, it's going after kids that have grown up on YouTube to unlock and kind of nurture that relationship and then transition him into the next sequence of outlets. And, can we build that into radio campaigns? Can we build that into TV campaigns? Like, you have to start somewhere. In some cases, these are the places to start.
In one sentence, what have you learned the most about handling analytics after all these years? What's the most important thing you've learned dealing with this stuff?
It's always changing. Like 5 years ago, completely different game. We weren't even talking about TikTok. Like we weren't talking about short form. I mean, that's the other thing too, is like TikTok started 5 years ago, Reels started less than that. YouTube Shorts really just ramped up a couple years ago. Like, so it's always going to change, and there's always going to be something else to the mix.
Addison.
I actually heard this on some other panel I've watched on YouTube once, but I think the quote was, be data driven but not data dependent. Like, be flexible, things to your point are always changing, benchmarks are always changing. Use the data, but at the same time you got to be flexible because new stuff's happening all the time.
Yeah.
Emily.
And I would say understand the context. And I think that word has been thrown out a lot here, but especially when you're handling art and music, sometimes that context is the artist's vision or the artist's story or the artist's commentary about that product, and layering that context with all the data allows you to make really informed decisions. And again, you don't only have to go with the data, you need to layer in the context that is the artist's vision as well.
That's great. What have we learned this morning? Well, first, there's no one-size-fits-all formula, no single formula for identifying a potential hit based on one particular metric. We learned about flexibility, things are always changing, context. For each track, Addison, Emily, and Casey, and many of you, you study all the numbers and looking for a combination of early indicators that could snowball into something big. That first spark might be streaming, or social, or Shazam, or spins, but we all know that when several of these important metrics look promising, there's a much better chance that a song is going to be sustainable. And that durability is what matters when you're talking about building an artist's career. So remember, your label and artist management friends have a ton of information that on hand, so you don't have to, if you don't have access to Chartmetric or Luminate Connect or co-brand, Melody IQ, and all these others, wherever you look for the sparks, be sure to ask for it. And a lot of industry terms have been brought up today, so if any of them seem unfamiliar to you, check your handy CRS app, because there's a new glossary that we put in there based on this session. It's 10 pages of music and media definitions. Definitely some bathroom reading here. From engagement to super fans to the formula for fan conversion ratios. So thank you all for being here today, and let's give our big thanks for our panelists. Casey Campbell, Addison Nunes, Emily Gilbert. Enjoy the rest of CRS, everybody. Thanks a lot.